The lively music of Jimmy Kimmel Live blared through the studio, but the atmosphere tonight felt unusually heavy. Stage lights blazed, cameras panned swiftly, and the announcer's voice rang out. "Please welcome White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." The audience responded with applause, though scattered boos echoed from the shadows. At just 27, Leavitt stepped out with unshakable confidence. Her blonde hair gleamed under the lights, high heels clicking rhythmically as she waved, unfazed by the mixed reception. Clad in a fitted navy business dress, she embodied a new era in American politics, young, sharp, and unafraid of confrontation. Across the desk, Jimmy Kimmel sat waiting, his trademark grin slightly more strained than usual. His eyes gleamed with the sharpness of a hunter locking onto prey. Adjusting his mic, he tapped the desk lightly. The audience murmured, sensing the tension in the air. This wasn't just a late-night interview. This was a battle waiting to unfold. The background music faded, and the stage lights focused on Kimmel as he leaned forward. "Welcome to the show, Karoline," he began, his tone light but laced with a jab. "At 27, you're the youngest White House press secretary in history. So, do you dance on TikTok, or is that strictly for X?" Laughter erupted, scattered claps echoing from the crowd. Leavitt tilted her head, smiling brightly but keeping her gaze locked on Kimmel. "I don't dance on TikTok in the White House, Jimmy," she replied, her voice steady yet sharp. "But if you'd like, I could teach you a few moves. Might even boost your ratings." The audience roared, some cheering in support. Kimmel nodded, acknowledging the comeback, but the mischievous glint in his eye remained. He wasn't done. "So, let's talk about Trump." His tone relaxed, but the shift in direction was deliberate. "Working for him must be quite an experience, right? I mean, you represent someone who's never been afraid to stir up controversy." Leavitt's expression didn't waver. "I'm proud to work for President Trump," she said firmly. "He says what others won't dare to, and I'm here to make sure his message is clear." The audience reacted. Some cheers, some murmurs of doubt. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, tapping the desk again as if weighing his next move. "Clear, huh?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "That must keep you pretty busy, clarifying things that aren't always easy on the ears." A subtle shift passed through the studio. The energy changed. Leavitt sat up straighter, her smile lingering but her eyes sharpening. Kimmel leaned in, lowering his voice slightly. "Let's talk about one of those clarifications. Last month at a press briefing, you defended Trump's immigration remarks, the ones many called racist. Are you comfortable standing behind those words?" Silence settled over the room. The laughter was gone. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt. Her face remained composed, though her fingers tapped lightly against the armrest, an almost imperceptible sign of focus. She took a breath, then leaned in. "Jimmy, if you actually watched that briefing, and I'm guessing you only saw the X clip, you'd know exactly what I said. I'm not here to justify things that don't exist. President Trump was talking about border security, not race. But media like yours love spinning it into something else." Her voice was even, firm, sharp with a Gen Z edge. Direct, no nonsense. The audience remained quiet, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. Kimmel's smile barely faltered, but his eyes flashed. He was ready for the next strike. Reaching under his desk, he pulled out a sheet of paper. "Oh, I didn't just watch a clip," he countered, unfolding it with dramatic flair. "I've got the full transcript." Trump said, quote, "We need to keep this country clean. You don't think the word clean there is a little problematic?" Leavitt didn't blink. "You're playing word games, Jimmy," she shot back, calm but cutting. "He was talking about crime, not people. If you're going to quote him, don't cherry pick to fit your script." The audience stirred, scattered applause, a shout of "That's right" from the back, but also some doubtful murmurs. Kimmel shrugged, feigning nonchalance, but his eyes gleamed with something else. He was enjoying this. "Word games or not," he challenged, "you're his spokesperson. When people call Trump a racist, don't you ever wonder what it is you're defending?" The question landed like a punch. Leavitt remained still, fingers pausing, eyes locked onto Kimmel. Then, slowly, she smiled, not to soften, but as a signal. She was ready to hit back. "I know what you want, Jimmy," Leavitt said, her voice low but unwavering. "You want me to back down. But I'm not here to play your game." The air inside the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio thickened, heavy like a storm about to break. Kimmel leaned forward, the paper in his hand trembling slightly as he waved it like a weapon. "Oh, I'm just getting started, Karoline," he shot back, his tone laced with sarcasm, his eyes cold and sharp. "You say you're not here for games, but I've got some things I'd like you to explain." He held her gaze for a beat before reading aloud. "On February 15th, you posted on X, 'We need a strong America, unviolated by outsiders who destroy.' Many say that's a dog whistle on immigration, and not the positive kind. What do you think?" Leavitt took a slow breath, then leaned in, her expression steady, almost daring. "Jimmy, you really love digging through my ex, don't you?" she quipped, her voice smooth but edged with a Gen Z bite. "That post was about national security, crime, protecting the border. If you and others want to twist it into a race thing, that's your choice, not the truth." She smiled faintly, not to soften the moment, but as a show of defiance. The audience reacted, scattered applause, a distant, "That's right," but also skeptical headshakes from the front rows. Kimmel didn't retreat. He smirked and tossed the paper onto the desk like it was no longer necessary. "Oh, I'm not twisting anything," he said, his tone sharpening. "I'm just quoting you. But if you want to talk truth, check this out." He gestured toward the big screen behind him. A video played, Leavitt at a recent briefing, standing at the podium, her voice firm. "We can't let America become a dumping ground for those who don't belong here." The clip cut. The screen froze. Kimmel turned back to her, raising an eyebrow. "Don't belong here," he repeated. "You don't think that's a little sensitive? I mean, you represent Trump, the same guy who's called some countries ishthols. You don't think you're enabling something?" The studio fell into silence. Even the faint murmurs from the crowd disappeared. Leavitt's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to Kimmel, unflinching. "You're good at editing, Jimmy," she said coolly. "That was about smugglers, the ones trafficking fentanyl across the border, stuff that kills thousands every year. But if you want to make it personal, go ahead. Just don't pretend you don't." "Know what I meant?" She tilted her head slightly, a smirk daring him to push further. The audience stirred. Louder claps this time, a yell of, "She's right," but also more disapproval from another corner. Kimmel chuckled, but it was the laugh of someone hit and refusing to show it. "I'm not pretending," he said, voice rising, finger pointing now. "You're the press secretary. Your words carry weight. And when you stand by Trump, who's retweeted things even I wouldn't touch on air, you don't think you're defending the indefensible?" He let the question hang in the air like a knockout punch. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt. This time, she didn't smile. She sat up straighter, hands on the table, eyes blazing. "Jimmy," she began, her voice low but forceful. "You want to talk retweets? Fine. Let's talk about the times you had to apologize for your old monologue jokes, stuff that wouldn't pass muster today. You want to play morality police? You're not cleaner than me." The audience erupted. Laughter. Applause. A voice from the back yelled, "She burned you, Jimmy." Kimmel raised an eyebrow, momentarily caught off guard but recovered fast. "Oh, nice one," he said, his voice tinged with grit. "But I'm not the one standing behind the White House podium. You are. And when Trump gets labeled a racist, don't. You ever stop and ask yourself what you're defending?" The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. Leavitt took a breath, her gaze never leaving his. "I ask myself every day," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost earnest. "I ask if I'm doing right, if I'm telling the truth, but what I don't do is let media like you define who I am." She paused, then leaned closer, her voice sharpening again. "You want to label me an enabler? Fine. But I won't sit here and let you twist reality just to fit your script." The audience exploded. Applause louder than before, mixed with boos from the dissenters. A TikToker in the crowd raised their phone, shouting, "She just won!" The studio now felt less like a late-night talk show and more like an arena crackling with tension. Kimmel tapped the desk, his smirk still present but no longer masking his intent to corner her. "All right, Karoline," he said, his voice steady. "Let me ask you something I know you don't want to hear." He paused, staring straight at her, eyes sharp as a blade. "You're 27, a young woman, part of Gen Z, a generation that talks about fairness, diversity, progress. So tell me, what do you say to the young people who feel you've betrayed them by standing behind Trump and his policies?" The question hit like a bomb, heavy, unrelenting. The audience held their breath, a few murmurs rippling from the back. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt. Her face remained calm, but her eyes flashed with fierce resolve. She took a measured breath, sitting up straighter, hands lightly resting on the table as if ready to land a decisive blow. Her gaze swept the audience, pulling them into the fight, before locking onto Kimmel. "Jimmy," she said, her voice low but charged, "you think you understand Gen Z just because you scroll through a few X posts?" A few chuckles broke through the tension. She pressed on, her voice firming. "I'm not here to please everyone, and I'm damn sure not here to live by a script you or anyone else wrote for me. Gen Z isn't a monolith. We have opinions, we argue, and we stand up for what we believe." The audience stirred, scattered claps, a rising hum of energy. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, about to interject, but Leavitt lifted a hand, cutting him off before he could. "You ask what I'd say to young people who feel betrayed?" She continued, her voice rising with confidence. "I'd tell them, find out for yourselves. Don't let media like you, Jimmy, or hashtags online decide for you. I stand where I do, because I believe in a strong, safe America, not because I want to be a mascot for anyone." The applause grew louder. A "hell yeah" rang out from the back. The camera panned to a young girl in the crowd, grinning as she filmed on her phone. Kimmel tilted his head, his smile now carrying a hint of strain. "Find out for yourselves," he echoed, voice laced with doubt. "Sounds nice. But when you stand behind Trump, who said things even I wouldn't joke about on air, don't you think you're sending a different message?" He tapped the desk, his eyes glinting like he'd spotted a crack in her armor. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She leaned in, locking eyes with him, her smile sharp, almost dangerous. "My message is clear, Jimmy," she said, her voice steady, unshaken. "I'm not Trump. I'm Karoline Leavitt. I'm not here to parrot his every word. I'm here to make sure the truth gets heard. Not your warped version or anyone else's." She tilted her head slightly, gaze unwavering. "You want to talk about messages? Look at you. A guy making a living mocking people, then pretending you're the voice of justice." The audience erupted. Laughter. Applause. A TikToker in the crowd shouted, "She just torched you, Jimmy." The camera cut back to Kimmel, eyebrow raised, rattled but holding steady. "Mocking?" Kimmel shot back, his voice rising. He pointed a finger at her. "I'm asking what millions want to know. You can't just say find out and expect it all to vanish." He laughed, but this time the crowd didn't bite. Leavitt's smile deepened, the smile of someone who knew she had the upper hand. "I don't expect anything to vanish, Jimmy," she said, her voice dropping into something even sharper. "I expect people to stop buying the stories you and old media keep pushing. Gen Z doesn't swallow that anymore. We want truth, not Hollywood scripts." The studio shook with applause. Cheers erupted from a group of young audience members standing in the back. Others whispered, unconvinced, shaking their heads. The camera panned, capturing the stark divide. Kimmel's fingers drummed the desk. Faster now. His eyes flickered, calculating his next move. "Old media," he repeated, his voice edged with grit. "You talk a good game, but you still haven't answered me. How do you feel representing someone millions call a racist?" Leavitt didn't blink. She tilted her head, eyeing him like he'd just walked into his own trap. "How do I feel?" she echoed, her voice low, brimming with control. "I feel proud to work for someone who isn't afraid to say what needs to be said, no matter what labels you and the media slap on him." Her eyes stayed locked on his. "I'm not here to apologize for Trump. I'm here to do my job." She let the words hang. Then, with a smirk, threw the question back at him. And you, Jimmy? How do you feel sitting here trying to trap me for a few viral clips? The audience roared. Applause. Cheers. A young guy in the crowd raised his phone, shouting, "Post it to X now." Kimmel leaned back, his smirk now a tight curve. He nodded, as if conceding she'd landed a hit. But his eyes stayed locked on her. "Trap you?" he said, his voice softening. "I just wanted the truth from your mouth." Leavitt's smile turned razor sharp. "You just got it," she said, her voice solid as steel. "And if you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine." The applause in the Jimmy Kimmel live studio still echoed, but Kimmel didn't let it linger too long. He leaned back in his chair, his smirk shifting into something more calculated. The camera zoomed in as he tapped the desk, eyes glinting like a fighter hit, but not down. "Karoline 1, Jimmy 0, huh?" he said, glancing at the audience with a knowing look. A small sign, a flicker of amusement from the crowd. Chuckles mixed with a few cheers and whistles. "You're good, Karoline," Kimmel said, leaning forward, his voice laced with something between admiration and challenge. "But don't think you can beat me with just clever lines and a confident smile." He paused, locking eyes with Leavitt, bracing for a counterstrike. Leavitt didn't flinch. Her eyes burned, but she remained perfectly still. Then, a faint smile. Not cocky, not forced, just the look of someone still firmly in control. "I don't need to beat you, Jimmy," she replied, her voice even but razor sharp. "I just need to tell the truth, something you don't seem too used to." The audience roared. Applause surged again, mingling with a few boos from the center. Kimmel arched an eyebrow, the hit landing harder than expected, but he recovered quickly. "Truth?" he echoed, sarcasm dripping from his voice. "All right, let's talk truth. You're 27, barely wet behind the ears in politics, and you think you've got it all figured out. Don't you think it's a little naive to stand behind a guy like Trump?" The question landed like a punch, aimed squarely at her biggest potential weakness. Youth. Inexperience. The audience hushed. A few murmurs stirred. The camera cut to Leavitt, her expression unreadable, but her fingers tapped the desk, a subtle beat of focus. She took a breath, leaned in, and locked onto Kimmel with unwavering eyes. "Naive?" she repeated, her voice low but charged with a Gen Z edge. "Jimmy, I'm not stuck in old thinking like you. Youth isn't a flaw, it's an advantage. I see what you don't, because I'm not blinded by decades behind that desk, making a living mocking people for laughs." The crowd exploded. Cheers. Applause. A girl in the audience raised her phone, shouting, "She's right." Kimmel laughed, a sharp, deflecting laugh, the laugh of someone who just took a hit but refused to show pain. "Mocking for a paycheck?" he shot back, his voice rising. "I do this to ask what you dodge. You say youth's an edge, but when you defend Trump, who's called his rivals low-life racehorses, don't you think you're selling out your own generation?" He tapped the desk, eyes gleaming like he'd spotted a weakness. But Leavitt sat taller, her fingers still, her gaze locked. "Selling out?" she repeated, her voice calm but cutting. "I'm not selling anything, Jimmy. I do this because I believe in it, not because I need your approval. Gen Z doesn't need a textbook hero. They need someone real. Even if it bugs you." She let the moment breathe, then with a faint smirk delivered the kill shot. "And you? You think name-calling is the worst thing in politics? Check your old comedy bits. I bet they weren't exactly high-class either." The studio shook with laughter and applause. The music barely cut through the noise. A young guy in the back held up a hastily scrawled sign. "Karoline 2. Jimmy 0." Kimmel exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shake off the hit. His smirk stayed, but his eyes flashed irritation. "I'm not saying I'm perfect," he admitted, his voice edged with grit. "But at least I'm not behind the White House podium justifying things millions see as wrong." He leaned in, voice dropping lower, more personal. "Don't you ever wonder if you're on the wrong path, Karoline? I mean, you're young. You've got time to switch." The question hung in the air, heavy, intimate. The crowd murmured. A few gasps. Leavitt held his gaze, unflinching. She took a measured breath, then leaned in just slightly. "I wonder every day, Jimmy," she said, her voice softer now but firm. "I wonder if I'm serving this country the best way I can. But what I don't do is let you or anyone else decide my path." A pause. Then she struck. "I don't need you as, my dad and I sure as hell don't need you as my conscience." The audience erupted. Roaring applause, cheers. A TikToker in the crowd shouted, "She just ended you, Jimmy." The camera panned to Kimmel. He leaned back, his fingers tapping faster, now his smirk a strained curve. "Ended me?" he echoed, his voice tight. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head with a forced laugh. "I just wanted you straight, Karoline. Maybe you're better at dodging than I thought." But the laugh didn't land. The crowd didn't bite. Leavitt's smile deepened, still cool, still in control. "I'm not dodging, Jimmy," she said, her voice steady as steel. "I'm just not playing by your rules. You wanted answers, you got them, you just don't like them." The applause rose again, not as explosive as before, but longer, an acknowledgement of her grit. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, hands off the desk now. His smirk lingered, but something in his posture signaled quiet surrender. "You're tougher than I thought, Karoline," he admitted, his voice lower now, but still barbed. He tilted his head slightly, eyes flickering, like a fighter knowing he was outscored but still looking for one last jab. "But before we wrap, one more question, just so the folks at home get a little more truth from you." The crowd chuckled, a few whistles breaking the tension, and just like that the game reset. Leavitt sat still, eyes blazing, unwavering. Then a faint smile, the calm grin of someone who had weathered storms before. "Go ahead, Jimmy," she said, voice even but brimming with confidence. "But don't expect me to give you the ending you want," the audience roared. Applause rippled through the studio, punctuated by a shout from the young crowd. "She's fire!" Kimmel raised an eyebrow, absorbing the hit but keeping his cool. He leaned in, his voice lowering like he was setting a trap. "You say you don't need my approval or anyone's," he began. "But when Trump's time is up, 4 years from now, or sooner, what will your legacy be? A loyal mouthpiece or just another young politician caught in his machine?" The question struck deep, sharper, more personal than ever. The audience hushed. A few murmurs stirred. The camera zoomed in on Leavitt. Her face remained steady, but her eyes flickered with fierce resolve. She took a measured breath, then leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the desk as if ready to close this fight. "My legacy?" she echoed, her voice low but packed with power. "I'm not here to build statues of myself, Jimmy. I'm here to work, to tell the truth, to serve this country. Call me a mouthpiece if you want, but I'm no one's puppet." She let the words settle, then delivered the knockout. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, and I stand on my own 2 feet." The audience erupted. Applause thundered. Cheers burst from the young crowd. A girl shot up her phone yelling, "Post it to X now!" Kimmel leaned back, tapping the desk lightly. His smile curved, but tension edged his voice. "On your own 2 feet," he repeated, sarcasm laced in. "Sounds good, but I bet Trump's clapping somewhere backstage." He laughed, trying to reel the crowd back to his side, but the laughter was thin, drowned by the growing tide of support for Leavitt. Leavitt tilted her head, studying Kimmel like he had just walked into his own trap. "Maybe he's watching," she said, voice sharp but composed. "But I don't need anyone's applause, not even yours." She leaned in slightly, her words cutting through the air. "You want a punchline for your show? Fine. But here's the last truth. You hold the mic, Jimmy, but I hold my ground. That's what Gen Z respects." She let the silence stretch, then smiled. A quiet, victorious grin. Not gloating, just certain. The audience clapped again, stronger, this time, longer. A final nod to the fight they had just witnessed. Kimmel exhaled, nodding slightly, his smirk tempered by something almost reluctant. "You're tough," he admitted, his voice lower now. His hands lifted slightly, a subtle concession. Thanks for coming, Karoline Leavitt. He turned to the audience, his usual charm sliding back into place. We'll be right back after the break. The break? Music swelled, but Leavitt didn't rush to stand. She extended her hand. Kimmel took it, a brief, firm shake, a silent acknowledgement of the battle fought. Their eyes locked for just a moment longer. Then, the screen faded to black. But the atmosphere didn't fade with it. The studio still buzzed with the aftershocks of the showdown. The crowd stood, applause fading into an excited hum, whispers, laughter, cheers all mixing together. The camera panned across the audience, catching faces filled with shock, excitement, and a few skeptical frowns. Near the front row, a guy in his 20s raised his phone, his fingers swiping fast. "She just crushed Jimmy," he said, turning to his friend who was already laughing and nodding. The camera zoomed in as the screen on his phone flashed. "Posting to X now." Leavitt v. asked Kimmel. Gen Z power beside him, another audience member lifted a hastily scribbled sign, Karoline 2, Jimmy 0. They both burst into laughter, caught in the energy of the moment. Further back, the mood was more divided. An older woman, maybe in her 50s, leaned toward the man next to her, her voice edged with skepticism. "She's just another mouthpiece for Trump," she muttered. "Too arrogant." The man beside her nodded. "Kimmel should have pushed harder," he whispered. "She dodged everything." The camera captured the contrast, the stark divide between the young and old, between admiration and doubt. By the exit, another group of audience members clapped slowly, as if still deciding whether Leavitt had won or just survived. Meanwhile, backstage wasn't quiet either. A secondary camera panned to the wings, where a producer leaned into his headset. "Jimmy, she just lit up the whole studio," he said urgently. "We need to keep this energy after the break." Kimmel, still at his desk, gave a small shrug, but his fingers tapped against the wood, his eyes flickering, like he was replaying the conversation in his head, rethinking every move. He nodded once. Then the show went on. Kimmel's fingers drummed lightly on the desk, a subtle tell of restlessness. The camera lingered on him for a beat, then shifted. Backstage, Karoline Leavitt had just stepped off stage. She paused, exhaling slowly. The steady rhythm of her heels against the floor halted for the first time. An assistant rushed over, handing her a water bottle. "You did great. They're going nuts out there." Leavitt took it with a calm, knowing smile. "I know," she said, curt, yet certain. Her eyes still burned like she had just walked out of a victory. But the fight wasn't over. In the audience, people still wouldn't sit. The energy in the room was shifting. No longer just applause, but something bigger. A teenage TikToker, maybe 18, stood in the crowd filming a selfie. The empty stage stretched behind her, a symbol of the battle that had just unfolded. "Guys, I just saw Karoline Leavitt burn Jimmy Kimmel down," she shouted, voice electric. "She's real Gen Z. No fear at all. Follow me for the full clip." She flashed a peace sign, and a few around her clapped in agreement. A few rows away, a middle-aged man shook his head. "She's good at talking," he muttered to his friend. But she didn't answer anything solid. His friend shrugged. "Maybe." But she won on vibe. Beyond the studio, the digital war begins. The reaction didn't stop in the studio. The camera cut to a phone screen. X loaded. A fresh tweet popped up. Karoline just schooled Jimmy Kimmel on Gen Z. Leavitt vs. Kimmel. Y'all fire back 200 likes. Seconds later, 500. A comment. She didn't back down. Epic. Another tweet from a different angle. Kimmel let her off too easy. Just all talk. Hashtags spread like fire on dry grass. The studio audience sensed it too. Dozens of phones lit up, fingers swiping nonstop. In another corner, a trio of young people huddled together, filming a quick interview. "What did Karoline just do out there?" one asked, holding a makeshift phone mic. A girl jumped in immediately. She stood up for herself. Didn't let Kimmel lead her. "I love how she's not afraid." The third nodded. "She's the kind of person. Gen Z needs real, no fake, laughter, energy. Post it now. The camera panned back, capturing the raw, unfiltered moment, as if Leavitt had just transformed from a political figure into something more. A movement. The new battlefield, social media and the press. The studio lights dimmed. The audience trickled out. But the clash between Karoline Leavitt and Jimmy Kimmel didn't end. It simply shifted to its next stage. Mere minutes after stepping off set, the first interview clip hit Karoline Leavitt just torched Jimmy Kimmel live. Leavitt vs. Kimmel. Fire back a 30-second clip of her boldest moment. You hold the mic, but I hold my ground. 500 likes. 200 retweets. 10 minutes. Comments flooded in. She's fearless. True Gen Z. Kimmel met his match. The hashtag, Leavitt vs. Kimmel, shot up X's trending list. Then, the TikTok wildfire started. The teenage girl from the studio posted a longer clip adding subtitles. Karoline schools Jimmy on truth. 100,000 views in under an hour. A Gen Z influencer with over 2 million followers jumped in. Karoline Leavitt just proved Gen Z isn't just TikTok dances. She's the voice we need. Gen Z fights back. 10,000 likes. Hundreds of comments. She spoke. For me, Jimmy's done. Not everyone agreed. A counter-response flared up. She's just Trump's megaphone. Don't idolize her. But the momentum was undeniable. Major news outlets didn't wait. CNN dropped an article 20 minutes post-interview. Karoline Leavitt stands firm against Jimmy Kimmel in fiery showdown. They quoted her viral line, "You hold the mic, but I hold my ground." A commentator noted, Leavitt turned an interview into a moment to define herself, a smart move in the social media age. But she dodged tough Trump questions, leaving doubts about her independence. Meanwhile, Fox News took a different angle. Karoline Leavitt, Gen Z powerhouse, crushes Jimmy Kimmel in media battle. They hailed her as a rising conservative star. She didn't just survive Kimmel, she made him look outdated. This is the leadership we need. The piece highlighted the roaring cheers from the young crowd as proof. The verdict wasn't universal. But one thing was clear, Karoline Leavitt hadn't just won a segment, she had ignited something much bigger. Beyond the studio, the digital war explodes. Even Fox admitted. She was young and the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But the reaction was already out of their hands. On YouTube, news and reaction channels flooded the platform with clips and breakdowns. One channel with 1 million subscribers posted, Karoline Leavitt destroys Jimmy Kimmel's second-by-second breakdown. The host dissected her every word, highlighting how she flipped the script when Kimmel asked about legacy. She didn't just answer, she made it a manifesto. That's top-tier media skill. It hit 50,000 views in the first hour with comments split. She's a legend, she's just good at dodging. A more critical channel countered with, Karoline Leavitt ducks Kimmel's questions. What's the truth? They argued she sidestepped Trump-related accusations but admitted she knows how to play the game. X, formerly Twitter, turns into a battleground. The opinion war raged on. One viral post featured her defiant moment. I don't need you as my conscience. The caption read, this is when she won. Kimmel had nothing left. 15,000 likes. Hundreds of retweets. But the pushback was fierce. Another post fired back. Leavitt is just a younger Trump, arrogant and empty. Kimmel should have pressed harder. It racked up thousands of interactions, mirroring the deep divide she had sparked. New hashtag emerged. Gen Z fights back. It spread like wildfire, driven by young supporters posting, Karoline is us. No fear of old media. Reddit, memes, and the viral machine. On Reddit, discussion threads exploded. On R Politics, a thread titled Karoline Leavitt versus Jimmy Kimmel, who won, racked up over 2,000 comments. One user wrote, she's sharp, but she dodged every Trump question. Classic spokesperson. Another countered, she didn't dodge, she beat Kimmel at his own game. Gen Z doesn't owe anyone apologies. Over on R Conservative, Leavitt was hailed as a hero. She made Kimmel look like a fool. Trump picked a winner. The split mirrored the studio audience. One side saw her as an icon, the other as cocky. Then came the memes. One viral Instagram post featured Kimmel's blank stare next to Leavitt, captioned, "When Gen Z schools an old man." 30,000 likes. Comments flooded in. She just dropped the quote of the year. A more critical meme showed Leavitt dodging a question, with a flying dodgeball labeled Trump accountability, and the caption, "high-level evasion skills." These spread fast, turning the interview into a pop culture moment. Global media takes notice international. Outlets weighed in. The BBC published, "America's youngest press secretary faces off with talk show star." They called Leavitt a Gen Z phenomenon shaping U.S. politics, but asked, can she sustain this appeal? A German newspaper framed her as a young Trump, smart but divisive. The impact was clear. This wasn't just a studio clash, it was a global conversation. Leavitt breaks her silence. An hour post-interview, Leavitt finally spoke. She tweeted, "Thanks to everyone who watched tonight. Truth is always worth fighting for. America first, 50,000 likes in 30 minutes. Fans replied, "You're a star." Critics clapped back. Nice words, no substance. Kimmel, meanwhile, stayed silent. But TMZ leaked a backstage source. Jimmy knew she'd be tough. He didn't expect her to hit that hard. The ripple effect, the moment that defined her, as the night stretched on, the digital firestorm raged. YouTube clips crossed 1 million views. Leavitt vs. Kimmel hit global trends. Young supporters dubbed her Gen Z's warrior. Detractors labeled her Trump 2.0. CNN brought in a media analyst who said, Leavitt used Kimmel as a springboard, an image win. Fox News countered, "She's our future." The final question loomed over social media and news headlines. Will this moment define Karoline Leavitt's career? Some saw it as the launch of a new political star, others a fleeting viral win. But one thing was certain. Leavitt left a mark. Not just in the studio, but in the digital battlefield, where Gen Z and old media are colliding harder than ever.